The number is 1,029. That's the elevation of Lake Mead this morning. For a century, that was a theoretical number, a line in a government report. As of today, it is a reality. The largest reservoir in the United States has officially fallen below the 1,030-foot trigger level, and with it, a century of agreements that built the modern American West have been shattered. 40 million people depend on this water. 7 states, 2 countries, and an economy worth trillions are all staring at a future that has never existed before. I'm breaking down what this new number means, who gets cut off first, and why the next 60 days could decide the fate of cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. This is Thursday, the 20th of August, 2026. Here's what you need to know about the Colorado River right now. If you live anywhere in the Southwest, from Denver to San Diego, stay with me on this one. Alright, first let's talk about the big picture, because the context here is absolutely critical. This is not a normal drought. This is not a dry spell. The American West is 22 years into the most severe megadrought in at least 1,200 years. This isn't just bad luck. Scientists call it aridification. The climate is fundamentally changing, becoming hotter and drier. Permanently, the Colorado River system was designed and built during the 20th century, one of the wettest periods in the last millennium. The architects of the 1922 Colorado River Compact made a fatal error. They promised more water to the states than the river actually carries, even in a good year. For decades, that mathematical error was covered up by massive reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Think of them as the region's 2 giant savings accounts. But after 2 decades of relentless drought and chronic overuse, those accounts are nearly empty. For the last 2 years, the federal government has been pleading with the 7 states that rely on the river: Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico in the upper basin, and Arizona, California, and Nevada in the lower basin, to come up with a voluntary plan to cut their water use by 2 to 4 million acre-feet. That is an almost unimaginable amount of water, up to a third of the river's entire annual flow. The states fought, they pointed fingers, and they failed to reach an agreement. The deadline passed, and now, the river is making the decision for them. That 1,029-foot reading at Lake Mead isn't just a milestone, it's a tripwire that activates the most severe water cuts in American history. The system is now in uncharted territory. Now, let's talk about the human toll, because this crisis is not about numbers on a spreadsheet. It is about lives and livelihoods. The first and hardest hit are the farmers of central Arizona. Pinal County, between Phoenix and Tucson, is an agricultural heartland. For generations, families have grown cotton, alfalfa, and pecans, fed by water from the Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile-long canal that brings Colorado River water across the desert. Their water has already been cut dramatically. Now, under these new emergency declarations, it is effectively being cut to zero. Fields are turning to dust. Farm equipment is being sold off. Multi-generational family farms are going bankrupt. These aren't just businesses. They are communities, and they are being erased. But this is no longer just a rural problem. The cities are next. Las Vegas gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead. They have been a world leader in conservation, but they are now facing cuts that will test the limits of their resilience. Phoenix and Tucson are watching their primary backup supply from the Cap Canal vanish, forcing them to rely on already strained groundwater and local river sources. And in California, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which supplies water to 19 million people from Los Angeles to San Diego, is facing the reality that its once reliable supply from the Colorado River can no longer be guaranteed. Then there is the power. The Hoover Dam at Lake Mead and the Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell are not just water storage facilities, they are massive hydroelectric power plants. Together, they provide electricity to millions of people across the West. But as the lake levels drop, the pressure of the water turning the turbines decreases. Power generation has already fallen by more than 25%. If the lakes drop much further, the dams will hit a point where they can no longer generate any power at all, a condition known as power pool. This would trigger an energy crisis on top of the water crisis. All right, now let's get into the data, because the specific numbers are what dictate everything that happens next. Lake Mead this morning is at 1,029.2 feet above sea level. This is just 34% of its full capacity. The critical elevation everyone was watching was 1,030 feet. Dropping below that moves the lower basin from a Tier 2A shortage to a Tier 2B shortage, a level never before implemented. This automatically deepens cuts for Arizona and Nevada, and for the nation of Mexico. Arizona's annual cut now jumps from 592,000 acre-feet to 640,000 acre-feet. Nevada's cut increases from 25,000 to 27,000 acre-feet. Mexico's cut goes from 104,000 to 114,000 acre-feet. But the real fear is what comes next. The next emergency threshold is 1,025 feet. If Mead hits that level, which federal projections show is now likely by early 2027, it triggers a Tier 3 shortage. This would be catastrophic, requiring even deeper cuts that would begin to impact municipal water supplies for the first time. The ultimate doomsday scenario is dead pool at 895 feet. That's the level where water can no longer flow past Hoover Dam through gravity. It is the end of the line. A few years ago, dead pool was a purely academic concept. Now, it is in the Bureau of Reclamation's official long-term projections. Now, let's look upstream to Lake Powell. It's in even worse shape. As of this morning, Powell sits at 3,522 feet, just 23% full. The critical number there is 3,490 feet. That is the minimum power pool elevation. Below that, the Glen Canyon Dam can no longer generate electricity. Powell is just 32 feet above that level right now. To protect Powell, the federal government has taken unprecedented actions, holding back water that was supposed to go downstream to Lake Mead and ordering emergency releases from reservoirs even further upstream in Colorado and Utah, like Flaming Gorge and Blue Mesa. They are draining the smaller savings accounts to keep the big ones from going completely bankrupt. This entire crisis is governed by a century-old collection of agreements, court decrees, and regulations known as the Law of the River. But that law was written for a different river in a different climate, and it has one feature that is causing immense conflict right now: seniority. Water rights are based on first in time, first in right. This means California, particularly the Imperial Irrigation District, which was one of all the earliest users, holds the most senior rights. As a result, even as Arizona and Nevada face devastating cuts, California has not been legally required to give up a single drop of its main allocation. That is politically and physically unsustainable, and the federal government knows it. That is why they are now threatening to use their emergency authority to impose cuts on all users, including California, for the first time in history. All right, let's now break down conditions by state so you know exactly what's happening where you are. Starting with Arizona, the state at ground zero. The Central Arizona Project is the junior rights holder in the lower basin, so it gets cut first and deepest. The cuts that are now locked in for next year mean agriculture that relies on the Cap Canal will receive no water. 0. Cities like Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Tucson are scrambling. They are activating deeper stages of their drought management plans, which means more aggressive watering restrictions for residents, higher water rates, and a complete moratorium on approving new developments that can't prove they have a sustainable water supply. Moving west to Nevada, the state only gets a tiny allotment from the river, just 300,000 acre-feet a year, but Las Vegas is entirely dependent on it. The Southern Nevada Water Authority has been proactive for years, banning non-functional turf at commercial properties and paying residents to rip out their lawns. But now they face a new threat. As Lake Mead drops, the quality of the remaining water degrades, with higher concentrations of salts and contaminants. More importantly, the uppermost water intake for Las Vegas sits at 1,050 feet. The lake is already well below that. They are now relying entirely on a deeper intake straw, a multi-billion-dollar engineering marvel drilled at 860 feet. It was built as an insurance policy. That policy is now being cashed in. Now California, the state, uses more Colorado River water than any other, about 4.4 million acre-feet a year. The vast majority of that goes to agriculture in the Imperial and Coachella valleys to grow crops like alfalfa, which is shipped overseas to feed cattle. The Imperial Irrigation District alone has rights to more water than Arizona and Nevada combined. For months, they have resisted calls for mandatory cuts, citing their senior legal rights. But the pressure is now immense. The federal government has made it clear that if the states can't agree on cuts, the Department of the Interior will impose them. All eyes are on California to see if they will finally agree to give up a significant portion of their water to save the entire system from collapse. And up in the Upper Basin, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, the problem is different, but no less severe. They are not legally required to make cuts based on Lake Mead's level, but they are physically running out of water. Their reservoirs are also at historic lows. They are legally obligated to deliver a certain amount of water downstream to Lake Powell each year, and in this drought, meeting that obligation is becoming nearly impossible. They are being asked to use less water to help fill Powell, which means paying for their own ranchers, farmers, and cities. Let's now turn to the forecast. And this isn't a 48-hour weather forecast. It's the outlook for the entire system over the next 12 to 24 months, and it is grim. First, the immediate crisis. The federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, has stated it has the authority to act unilaterally to protect the system. The failure of the states to produce a voluntary plan by the August deadline means the feds are now expected to announce their own plan for mandatory cuts any day now. This will be a political firestorm. Lawsuits are guaranteed. But the government believes it has no choice. The physical reality of the river's collapse is overriding the legal framework. Expect an announcement from the Secretary of the Interior before the end of September. It will be the most consequential decision on Western water in American history. Second, the winter outlook. The only thing that can begin to reverse this is snow. A massive winter snowpack across the Rocky Mountains is desperately needed. But massive is the key word. To get the system back to a safe level would require not one, but 5 or 6 consecutive winters with 130% to 150% of average snowfall. The long-range climate forecasts show no indication of that happening. In fact, the trend is toward warmer, drier winters. Everyone is praying for a miracle winter, but planning for another dry one. Third, the infrastructure risk. As Lake Powell approaches minimum power pool at 3,490 feet, a new danger emerges. Below that level, the only way to send water downstream to Lake Mead is through a set of 4 8-foot wide steel pipes at the bottom of the dam, known as the river outlet works. These pipes were not designed for continuous, high-volume use. There are fears they could be damaged by cavitation, a phenomenon where air bubbles form and collapse with explosive force, potentially damaging the dam itself and crippling the ability to send any water downstream. This is an engineering nightmare scenario that is now on the table. The bottom line is that the era of the Colorado River as a reliable, abundant resource is over. The assumptions that built the Southwest for the last 100 years are gone. Every farm, every business, and every household in the basin is now facing a new reality of scarcity. The if is gone. The only questions now are how severe the cuts will be, who will bear the most pain, and whether the system can be managed down to a sustainable level without a complete economic and social collapse. Let me now talk about what is being done. Cities are implementing emergency water conservation plans. States are spending billions on water recycling projects and desalination research. But these are long-term solutions to an immediate crisis. Right now, the focus is on demand reduction. That means paying farmers not to farm, paying cities to rip out more grass, and forcing a fundamental rethinking of how and where people live in the American West. There are no easy answers left. All the low-hanging fruit has been picked. From here on out, every decision involves immense pain and sacrifice. Before I go, a quick summary of where things stand this Thursday morning, August 20th. Lake Mead has officially fallen below the 1,030-foot crisis level, triggering the most severe water cuts in the nation's history. Arizona agriculture faces a complete cutoff of its primary water source. 40 million people across 7 states are now in an official water shortage emergency. The federal government is poised to impose its own drastic, unilateral cuts on all states, including California, for the first time ever. The Hoover and Glen Canyon dams face the real prospect of shutting down power generation, and the doomsday scenario of dead pool is now a plausible outcome in official government models. The system is broken. This is a developing situation, and I will be back with updates as the federal government makes its move.